Lev Vygotsky, who lived from November 17th, 1896 to June 11th, 1934, was a prominent Soviet psychologist. He was involved in the psychological works in a variety of disciplines, but his legacy most strongly lives in his work in developmental psychology. Vygotsky is best known for his social development theory, which went relatively under the radar, particularly in the Western world, until its worldwide publication in 1962. Before examining Vygotsky's work, however, it is important to understand the prominent developmental theories of the day. This will provide special insight as to why his proposed alternatives were so groundbreaking. Jean Piaget is widely credited as the founder of the study of human cognitive development, and it was his studies and theories that served as the scientific consensus during the early 1900s. Of course, this is not the focus of our discussion, so we will only touch upon it briefly to serve as a contrast to Vygotsky's theories. Piaget forwarded the idea of stages of development, which is to say that each child, regardless of culture, language, social status, etc., will pass through a certain set of stages. These were thought to be a biological imperative, which were a universal evolutionary component of the human condition. I will quickly describe these stages, as they will serve to describe some of the similarities and differences between the primary thoughts of the day and Vygotsky's social development theory. The first stage is the sensory motor stage. During this time, which lasts from birth to 2 years, actions taken by the child have no deeper thought or rationale. They are simply a set of reflexes that are both innate and the result of basic interactions with the environment. The pre-operational stage begins at the age of 2 and lasts until the child is 6 to 7 years old. In this stage, children are just beginning to develop cognitive structures and the capacity for abstract thought. Children in this stage of development are said to behave in a manner that is commonly described as egocentric, meaning they are incapable of considering the concerns or reactions of others. Children at this stage of development will not understand that different individuals may have different reactions to the same stimuli. They also tend to display animism, which describes the conference of human traits onto inanimate objects. The third stage in Piaget's framework is the concrete operational stage. During this time, which spans from 6 or 7 years to 12 or 13, children become increasingly capable of complex reasoning tasks and will not fall victim to some of the simple thought fallacies that categorize previous stages. In general, children's thought tends to be increasingly influenced by reality during this stage. The final stage, from 13 to adulthood, is the formal operational stage. This is when children become capable of complex abstract thought. Children are now able to set goals and realistically consider their futures. They can also engage in thought that is completely abstract without the need for concrete prerequisites. The important takeaway from Piaget's framework, at least with respect to the competing theory from Vygotsky, is that these stages are a kind of unnegotiable truth, a biological fact that fails to make consideration of language, culture, and society's role in cognitive development. Essentially, that development always comes before learning. We are unable to interpret learning events that outpace our current stage of development. As we will see as we continue, according to Vygotsky, this is simply not the case. While both researchers would assert that learning comes through interaction with the environment, there is a difference in the view of how this learning takes place. If Piaget would say that development precedes learning, Vygotsky would argue that learning precedes development. Boiled down to its essence, the idea is as follows. Our current developmental state is enhanced only when we are presented with learning tasks and social interactions that are slightly out of our current grasps. Let's get more into the nitty-gritty, however, and discuss how the implications of this method has had an effect on our careers as educators. According to Vygotsky, all individuals are born with an essential toolkit that allows for interaction with the world and cognitive development. These are called elementary mental functions. Some examples are as follows. Sensation. Infants are born innately able to sense the world through their senses, which allows them to react to their environments on a primitive level. They can tell whether things are hot or cold, they can tell the taste of a particular food, they can sense the texture of a blanket. Involuntary bodily processes, such as hunger. Children do not have to be taught to display hunger or relieve themselves, for example. Basic memory. Infants can recognize the sounds of their family's voice or the texture of a blanket, but won't necessarily be able to memorize the context of those senses. These elementary functions, through social and cultural interaction, eventually become higher mental functions, the process and strategies that we employ as adults. Vygotsky argues that we are Vygotsky argues that our actions are limited while we are functioning at an elementary mental level. We are devoid of self-awareness or cultural awareness and simply react to our environments. When we move on to higher mental functions, we develop self-control. Our behavior is influenced by our culture and interactions with others. Vygotsky claims that these higher mental functions essentially develop twice, once externally, on the social or cultural level, this is referred to as the interpsychological level, and then internally, referred to as the intrapsychological level. The social development functions as a tool or bridge to internal development, and in this way, higher mental function is heavily influenced by the culture and society in which it develops. Without social learning, children would not be able to survive or function. A commonly used example of this is memory. As we age, we develop an ever-increasing capacity for memorizing large numbers or complicated concepts. In our literate societies, we have note-taking as a tool for this. However, in societies without written language, other strategies have developed, such as tying knots or carrying rocks. Another example is the development of the elementary mental function of sensation into the higher level function of perception. Children innately possess the ability to sense hot and cold, for example, but it is only with social interaction that they understand the underlying context and can pull meaning or importance from sensory input. The final example I'll mention is the concept of attention. Humans are widely thought to be incapable of processing multiple sensory inputs at the same time, and as a result, our attention jumps from one item to the next. Without social learning, however, children are unable to adequately pick and choose which inputs deserve their attention and for how long, which can be safely ignored. The result is the short attention span that we associate with children of a young age. Language, of course, is a key to our ability to interact socially, and as a result, it is an important facet of cognitive development. Vygotsky breaks speech down into three stages. The first is external speech. Children below the age of 3 are generally incapable of translating their limited thoughts into verbal utterances. Despite the limited capacity for thought, however, they still desire to influence the actions of others. As such, they voice their feelings, hunger, sadness, discomfort, etc., with the limited verbal tools at their disposal, such as crying, laughing, or cooing. Toward the end of the stage, we may see some 2 or 3 word phrases that are often associated with toddlers. Stage 2, which takes place between 3 and 7, is referred to as egocentric speech. Children of this age will speak more clearly and demonstrate more complex verbal constructions, but it is mostly done out loud. They will talk to themselves, often narrating their own actions and observations without self-editing. Stage 3 is inner speech. This is when older children become capable of internal thoughts and analysis. They are able to solve tasks and make calculations without speaking out loud. This is the sort of running commentary that we adults have going on in our heads. Because language is frequently the engine that facilitates social interaction, Vygotsky posits that language can heavily influence individual perception. Take the Inuit culture, in which there are more root words for snow than in English. This indicates a cultural perception which places more emphasis on snow. In this way, language is capable of shaping our perception and our cognitive development. A quick aside about that. There's a commonly mentioned idea that Inuits have hundreds of words for snow, and that's been debunked. However, the idea that there are more root words for snow than in English has been supported in recent studies. A further point of similarity between the theories of Piaget and Vygotsky is the notion that children are naturally curious and will actively involve themselves in their own learning. However, the similarities end in Vygotsky's emphasis of sociocultural contributions to over self-discovery. There are 2 essential concepts that underlie this process. The first is the idea of a more knowledgeable other. The idea is that learning takes place when an individual with a higher level of mastery of a specific skill or task comes into social contact with the learner. Of course, this more knowledgeable learner is often a parent or teacher or another adult, but it could also be a more skillful peer or even a computer or machine. Vygotsky claims that learning is more effective when aided by the input of a more knowledgeable other. The zone of proximal development is the gap that exists between what an individual currently knows and the abilities he would be able to access with the aid of a more knowledgeable other. Vygotsky identifies this as the location in which learning takes place. Take, for example, a child learning how to play soccer. He may have an individual drive and innate curiosity to learn the sport, and he may be able to gain some level of proficiency going outside and kicking the ball around on his own. However, let's say he instead opts to watch pro players on television. He mimics their strategies and movements and with practice can replicate some of their abilities. He also solicits aids from his father and from soccer coaches who further demonstrate movements and techniques. These more knowledgeable others have facilitated learning in the zone of proximal development, and now through these interactions he has progressed much further than he would on his own. It is this approach that has had a large influence in our field as educators. After all, what is a teacher but an efficiently recognized, more knowledgeable other? On a daily basis, we provide instruction and social interaction that allows learning to take place, eventually resulting in independence and mastery.